all set.
Sounds good. Let's get our meeting started for Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Subcommittee. Today is February 4th, 2020. We'll start off with, if we'd like, a motion for the minutes approval.
So moved.
Second it.
Great. So let's do a roll call vote on the approval of the minutes of January 14th, 2020 meeting. Member Christenbaum.
Yes.
Member Ayala.
Ayala, yes.
Member Woodland.
Woodland, yes.
Member Gustafson.
Gustafson, yes.
And the chair votes yes. So, and now we are going to proceed to, which is probably going to take most of our meeting, continued policy review of the Promoting Civil Rights and Prohibiting Harassment, Discrimination, and Hate Crimes, which is policy number 6437. Before we start, I believe we had some to-dos from people who had volunteered to do some research, and who is ready to or is willing to start up kind of the conversation of what their research was and bring us up to speed before we dig into the policy and find out what our changes need to be made for those.
Mine is, I think, fairly short. So I don't know if you want to start with the shorter ones and move up, or start with the biggest piece, which I think is Linda's, and go down.
What I would was wondering is if it would be useful to just do a quick overview of the harassment policy as is compared to the MASC. So I have a little slideshow with that comparison, but at a very high level overview. And I wondered if we might be able to start there, talk about the overviews for the other policies, and then dig in, because I think it's quite.
That sounds like a great idea. Yep. That's
Okay.
sounds like a great idea. So you have the floor, Member Woodland.
Okay, so let me get to presenting, I suppose. And I always go to click the wrong one there. Okay, so now I can't see you guys anymore, so just say something if you need anything to be different. Can you see the screen I'm sharing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking that if we just start off, this is just the kind of the preamble or the first paragraph of each section, of each policy. And throughout this, the left side is our current policy for 6437. And then the right side is the ACAB from MASC. So just going over it, that has the basic kind of starting out, but I felt like they were pretty different tenor to each policy. So I'm going to just scroll through to give kind of an overview. So when I was looking through it, I thought that there were some good beginnings in our policy in terms of the definition, the references to the legal policies they have to go back to, the kind of prompt and effective action required, the investigation, at least that those pieces are in there. But then there are a few issues that I saw just kind of off the cuff of going through. And then on the ACAB policy, one of the big problems I had going through that as a comparison piece is that halfway through they introduce the definition of sexual harassment, and then it seems like it forgets that it's a harassment policy and seems to focus on the sexual harassment instead. And I don't really know why, and I hadn't gotten to researching that part. So I'll come back to these at the end. So I thought that the two policies both kind of take a different aspect on the who and the who is responsible, the location, and then kind of what I saw in ours was the promise that it'll be promptly investigated, that discrimination, hate crimes, and harassment, that there'll be prompt effective action, and so on. The ACAB policy, I think, spends quite a bit of time on defining who is responsible, where this takes place, and then some other definitions as well. And that, I think, is something our policy could use. And then another big thing that we'll need to update is that the protected classes listed in the harassment policy currently is not complete. So on the right, there's the ACAB policy with the basis of race, on the basis of race, sex, gender identity, creed, color, national origin, sexual orientation, religion, marital status, or disability. So we have some of those, but not all. Another one that I wasn't sure about, or in terms of pregnancy, military status, and arrest record, which I thought were potentially classes that we would need to include. I'm not sure why the MASC doesn't have that.
Linda,
Yeah,
can I
sure.
interject? Because when you get to my section, pregnancy is included in a lot of places in MASC policies I discovered. So I'll touch on that when I get to my section.
That's good.
I did find out about that.
Okay, because I think that Wachusett does have a pregnancy policy.
Yeah,
I think too. So I didn't take a look at that.
I just wanted to clarify since you mentioned it, but I'll get to it when I get to my section.
All right. So, and then in terms of other parts that I thought was interesting, in our policy, discrimination or hate crimes, neither one are defined in our policy, and I didn't see where it would be. That seems like a kind of dead end for where I was looking so far, and I think that I'm curious to see what the the non-discrimination policies have to say in this regard for definitions. And then I hope that you had a chance to read through. I had sent a couple links with Attorney General Healy's guidance from this past November for schools. And so, she included the term hate incidences for the guidance on harassment and anti-bullying policies for schools. And so I don't know if that's something that we would want to think about when we get to the more kind of wordsmithing and revisions. So then both policies have disciplinary action or retaliation statements. They come in different orders. One thing that I thought was good in the MASC version with this differentiation between students and employees. And there's another part where that comes into where I don't think that that's explicitly stated in our harassment policy. It's kind of lumped all together. And then this is where I was thinking there's a lot more delineation between who is involved. So the MASC sample policy has this employee to student harassment and student to student harassment explanation in the definition. And I think that that's something that I think that we should look at when it comes time to updating our policy in more specific ways. And again, this would be another time, in my opinion anyway, of kind of coming back to this when it comes time to really, cutting, pasting, rewording. But here are some of the other different ways that MASC had written out the harassment definition, given examples. But I think that a lot of the key required pieces are in our current policy. It just might be a way to make them more user-friendly, clearer to understand. And then here is where I kept coming back to and going kind of off the rails of, we have a lot of procedure in our policy. And also in the, this one has a lot of text, so I don't think it's quite readable for you guys. But there's an issue too of updating the, I guess you'd say, chain of command, the titles of who gets the reporting, what happens from the report to the next steps. I think that's what we'll need to talk about is how much does that belong in a policy, Because if you look at the other side, there's, for ACAB from the sample policy, it's much smaller. Um, and then I found some things that I wondered if it should go into its own policy. So the student and staff responsibilities, I saw a potential separate policy with student rights and responsibilities, where the specific rights that were listed and their kind of other side of the coin responsibilities were with civil rights, the right to attend free public schools and the responsibility to attend regularly, the right to due process and the right to free inquiry and expression, and the responsibility to follow reasonable rules and privacy. And so I don't know if this is the kind of thing where we would want to create this other policy, if it fits within this harassment or non-discrimination policies, but I thought that was a topic we might want to explore. And then another instance too about this reporting other incidences heading in our policy that goes into child abuse, reporting child abuse and neglect, which I wasn't quite sure about its home in harassment. There's this alternative policy of student welfare, and we do have a child abuse and neglect policy as well. So I don't know if this is just something that's required to be in a harassment policy to state these other incidences that might be related, but we have other policies. I don't really know how if that's supposed to be like a cross reference or it's just in there. I don't know. And then another one too of so in our policy, it also has about sexual harassment being that might get reported to police, and then injury and that these other reasons that there might be reporting. And then again, a lot of process with the response. There are some things that I know we would have to include about promptly responding and so on. And so that would be another part of looking over this in more detail. And then in our current policy, we have more procedure of the protection against retaliation, ensuring safety during investigation, determination of proceedings if they'll be informal or formal, violations, false reports, and discipline. And so that I saw a lot of overlap or potential overlap with the anti-bullying policy, and so, or the plan rather. So I don't know how we want to handle that policy versus procedure. The sample policy doesn't have the kind of details that this went into. And I don't know if that's a question of like a timeline, if when this was written for the district, there were different rules, different just tendencies of how these policies would be written, different regulations for it. And then now it's moved somewhere else. So that was something that I came up against. And then in the sample policy, there was a large section, like I said in the beginning, about sexual harassment, and then it seemed to overtake the entire policy. We currently have a separate sexual harassment policy. And just to note, I put that it's about 6 pages, whereas in this sample policy, it's about a couple, 2 pages about the definition, response, retaliation, and notice, and record keeping. So I don't know if that's something that we would want to consider bringing into this one, keeping them separate and updating the separate policy as well. And then one other note, with the change in federal administration, I've already there have been some guidance that's been overturned from the past 4 years. So I don't know if more will be coming that would be impacting the way we would revise this policy. So that was just something I thought might be prudent to keep in mind with what we look at for what kind of changes we would end up making. And then I think only a few more, guys. The discipline section, let's see. So this is another one where I didn't know if the procedure versus policy discussion, you know, the sample policy didn't have nearly as lengthy of a section about discipline. I didn't know if we would want to look at it in a different light compared against anti-bullying or what. And then the oversight for the way it's listed out in our current policy, I believe that our titles need to be adjusted. I don't believe we have any mention of record keeping requirements. And so that might come into play more with how we want to, if we want to bring in the sexual harassment policy into this or keep it separate or what. And then another part where the sample policy has an extra note of that this that while this policy sets forth our goals of promoting an environment that is free of harassment, including sexual harassment, the policy is not designed or intended to limit our authority to discipline or take remedial action for conduct which we deem unacceptable, regardless of whether that conduct satisfies the definition of harassment or sexual harassment. I don't believe our policy has a note quite, at least not as clearly stated as that. So again, I felt like there were some good beginnings, but that we have quite a bit of issues. And you know, among those are defining the relationships in an episode of harassment, how we want to handle the process for investigation, for discipline, for and so on. If there's any room to take a positive or proactive approach within the policy, like what the district will provide to students to prevent harassment, or professional development that we would be committed to providing to implement anti-harassment procedures or something like that. I don't know if that has a home within a policy like that, but I thought it's something we might consider. And I think that is it. So this is such a long time to go without seeing your faces. I'm going to stop presenting if that's okay with everybody. And okay. So that is what I had. I don't know if you want me to go back to anything or what you want to do from here.
That was really helpful, the way you broke it all down. I mean, so many things that kind of kick us off into whatever direction we decide to go here to start. But thank you for doing all that. That was really great.
I'd like to chime in. I wish I had thought to create something like what you created, because I think it's super helpful to kind of put those pieces side by side. So, you know, I would very much love for us all to have a hard copy of that. There's a lot to digest. There's a lot to kind of look over and weigh the pros and cons. I was looking at my notes as you were, you know, as you were presenting, and I see a lot of overlap here. But I think having the slideshow perspective where you've got both pieces on either side, I think is a good place to start. And I wish I had thought about presenting in that way. So I guess what I'd like to do is you know, move us all in that direction, to have that as a model, or at least myself, I'd like to be able to present it like that. I can go over what I came up with today verbally, but I'd really like to be able to provide you all with a side-by-side comparison. I think it's going to be super effective.
Yeah, I can make a copy to distribute for everybody. You know, one
I
thing
have-
that
No, go ahead, Linda. I think you're
Oh,
going to
the-
say the same thing I was going to say.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
well, I don't think so quite, but I was just going to say that there is, so there's actually a good page or two of our policy that I did not even enter into that because it was the dense informal proceeding versus formal proceeding that just had no bearing whatsoever in the sample policy. But I can distribute those, and if there's something that you want me to get back up on the screen, I can pull it back up. I don't know how you guys do this without seeing everybody.
I was going to suggest, is it, because I also have a document, although it's not a side by side, it's just a document that may be changing and for reference as we go. Is there any way we could create a folder or a drive on the drive so we can just share various pieces that we come across or that might be helpful? Is that a logistical thing that we're allowed to do?
I think it's okay.
It's just a suggestion, maybe
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
save sending
I mean,
links back
I
and
guess
forth.
practice has been sending through Rebecca and
Oh, we can do that then.
and now Randy, but I think a drive we should have everything sit in a drive. I think it's easier than sifting through the
Yeah.
emails. So
I think that's what I meant. I mean, if we have,
absolutely,
that's what I was thinking. So
yeah, I'll talk to Randy about that.
I haven't
Yeah,
just kind of a policy where it's been so meaty to date in my tenure here on the committee. So, nothing's required. I think so much headspace and so much cross-referencing. So this is really going to be an undertaking.
And I think one of maybe the keys to solving this puzzle too, Linda was getting at it, is looking at the bullying prevention intervention plan as like the investigation process as being what we use for all of these different statutes here. And that's something that when I was looking at the bullying prevention intervention plan, our legal counsel had said that that's a good practice to do, is to use the same process, but we're looking at different actions that have happened in there. So that way people become adept at the procedure and the process that's consistent between all. So that might be something that helps us unlock all these different layers here.
Yeah, and in the what I've come across with reading specifically in the Attorney General's document was that this school districts should be mindful of when they're looking at a harassment incident that they also need to take a look at it from an anti-bullying stance too, because just because it fulfills the requirement for one type of incident doesn't mean that you're off the hook for checking it out in terms of the other. So if it's the same procedure, and this is what I was coming back thinking, kept thinking, coming back to you, Brendan, was that, the usability part of it, right, is having the procedure in the policy, if that actually creates a roadblock to doing a proper investigation and ensuing procedure. And so that's where I don't know how that's supposed to intersect for us.
I had some questions to come up about that too. I actually talked with Tracy about a couple of things related to what I was looking into, where I corresponded with her, and that led to a comment that a comment about being careful to separate the two, which we were going to have a follow-up conversation about, which we haven't had yet. So it's definitely, I think, something to consider. I don't know if it's something that if enough of us have questions about that, if maybe it's worth inviting her to talk to us about it, if we all would appreciate that conversation. But in the email, I mean, I'll get in a little more detail, but that's one of the things she was clear to say. This doesn't exist this way because that would be procedure, not policy, and there's a separation.
Yeah, and that's Tracy Novick, right? Is that?
Yes, we
Okay.
didn't get to the follow-up clarifying conversation today, but I thought it was interesting that that's come up in in the broader sense. I was very much looking forward to that conversation, but I don't know if there's enough of us that have questions about things like that. It may be useful to have her talk to all of us. I don't know, but it's just a thought.
I do think that separating procedure from policy is makes sense to me. That the policy is the enduring piece, and the procedure may, based on resources, based on new best practices and making data-driven decisions, may be the thing that is more living and more dynamic, right? I mean, certainly you want to have a procedure that is vetted and is thorough and is guaranteed. But I think that lives somewhere else. I think that lives, that procedure lives in a plan that is, reviewed and revised regularly by those that are sort of in the trenches, in the school, and doing that. But we, as a body, being overseers of the policy, should be focused in on the policy and not necessarily so much, I think, on the implementation of the plan. However, I did not see anywhere in the language of the policy that a plan would be developed and implemented, and that reporting would back to the school committee on data would be a part of that. And I think that our policy should reflect that a plan exists and that we get some sort of feedback mechanism in a report, an annual report, by the district, by the people in the school district, so that we can kind of look at trends and we can look at plans and resources and things like that. So in other words, at the end of the year, if you say, gosh, we had this particular year was an instance of, high bullying and harassment reports, and we had, 6 valid investigations, and they led to X number of disciplinary procedures, right? That's something that would inform our resource decisions, right? But I would like to have that language in the policy, that a plan exists and that a mechanism for reporting and feedback be part of it. But I think the procedure needs to be living someplace else.
I'm just going to add to the procedure part too. I think sometimes policies, when people write them, they want to make it like an owner's manual or like an all-one. Like if I just print this, it's got the whole roadmap. And you're right, I agree with you, Laura. I mean, I was taking some notes as you were talking, Linda. And so good policies are functional and user-friendly, right? And they also solve, minimize, and prevent problems. So it's harder to do that when they get a little clunky, to use that language. So yeah, I agree with you.
So as we're talking, I'm kind of keeping a wish list for what we want to include in this policy. So if you don't mind calling those out specifically while we're talking about it, that would help a lot with taking the notes. So right now I've got the separation of the procedure out from the policy, but that the policy should reflect that there is a plan to be that would need to be reviewed regularly, much like in the anti-bullying policy that we have. And then a requirement.
I believe there is
back.
a procedure, though. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I remember correctly, back in the education subcommittee, there is a policy with some sort of procedure on how to report the bullying. And I believe, Laura, you were mentioning that was something you wanted to see. I believe we have already a policy like that. But I know you were saying a wish list, Linda. I was just trying to mention that that part might already be there.
Yeah, so I think in our anti-bullying policy, it has that note of there must be an anti-bullying, or what is it, the bullying prevention and intervention plan that needs to be reviewed. I think it's every 2 years. I think that's what I recall in one of our policies. So if we had some, so I guess what I was getting from the conversation was that a similar wording in the harassment policy for harassment incidences. Are we on the same page? I see some nods. Okay.
No, I agree. I just want to make sure that we're not overlapping with something that's already out there. If I remember correctly, that policy also had addressed it, but I'm not sure how well it addressed it.
Okay.
You know what policy that is? Are you talking about the bullying policy?
No, I'm talking about when you said like the process of, being able to make a complaint and expectations of how it will be followed up. Those were, I believe, outlined in one of the policies we had, and I believe we reviewed it last year in the Education Subcommittee. And if I remember correctly, now my memory could be wrong, if I remember correctly, it did address sexual harassment, but not definitely to the detail of it, but it did address it, that this is the process that would be followed. So I just didn't want to reinvent the wheel if we're talking about also, separating the process versus the policy.
I guess it would be helpful if we knew what that policy was numbered and called to be able to cross-reference it.
Yeah, I think we could definitely ask Bob Imber or Christina Smith. They probably have the numbers at some point that they could probably reference it and come up with what that was.
I think our website is down, the district website. I was just trying to look quickly, but I think something crashed on it. So once it's back up, I can do a little dig in there.
I think Awesome is right. I think I remember it from last year. I was on the Ed subcommittee last year, and I recall us talking about it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get the reference as soon as I have access. Did we want to move to somebody else in their homework, quote unquote?
I mean, I'm happy to verbally share my thoughts, but I don't have anything as formal as what Linda had, and I was super impressed with. I'm just going to put
I
that
think
up.
Linda set the bar really high for everybody.
So I guess if you want to hear from me, I'll be happy to share. I looked at the my charge was the non-discrimination, and comparing that to the MASC sample policy AC. So I guess let me just tell you what I know, and that is that we have this policy here, which is number 6437A, and we also have 6631A, which is our non-discrimination policy. So I looked at those, and then I also looked at the MASC AC, which was adopted. The date on that was July 2012. Okay, so our 6631, the non-discrimination policy, is dated 1/19. So that's a relatively new review. I still feel that there's some language in there that maybe, things are moving at hyper speed in terms of what is acceptable language and terms, and I'm not sure that we have a comprehensive list there. But our 6437 is dated 2/11. So the AC was written after that, as far as I can tell. What I see is let me look at my notes here. So the Wachusett 6631, which is our non-discrimination policy, is in fact the lower paragraph of the AC policy. So it's essentially the same thing. What it's missing is the upper half of that AC policy. And I do think that that's rather important. Like I said, if I had been as prepared, I would show you that what's missing there, and maybe I'll do that in a follow-up document. I'll actually put it side by side. But I think that there's an intro, and then there are 6 points of reference in the AC policy that the MASC put out. Why we don't have that in our 6631, I don't know. Yeah, thank you, Brendan. That's awesome. Why we don't have that, I'm not sure. And so my recommendations are that we look to adopt the AC non-discrimination policy in its entirety as written, as we see it here on the screen. And that would remove the need, or sort of replace the 6631, which I know was not part of our, is not on our written agenda, and I'm not sure that I'm, I might be breaking protocol here, but this is where my discoveries have led me. So, we may have to put that on a different agenda on a different night. But it is related to the 6437, which is, within our agenda here tonight. I recommend that, looking at the 6437, as we've already discussed, that we take out the procedure. That was definitely something that I would recommend. I see the second page and the second paragraph on the second page as being procedure to omit, which starts out with upon receipt of a written or oral report or complaint, and so on and so forth. The second page, keep going. Yep, upon receipt. So that second paragraph, I see that as being sort of procedural and worthy of being taken out and put into a plan. As I see it. So I don't know if you want to make a comment there, if that's appropriate. And then I also, going on to the first page, going back to the first page, I see a lot of language in there that actually is part of the Equal Education Opportunity Policy, JB and JBA, which is the MASC. So, and then I also found that the bottom part of that is also AC. Gets a little bit complicated, and I wish I had anticipated how complicated this is going to be. But where it says reporting harassment, discrimination, or hate crimes right there, that is AC in my mind. So I guess the bottom line is there's a lot of different policies embedded in this one policy, which, I think that was kind of my reason for wanting to go through this, is that, is there a reason why all this sits together from our perspective, or would it be better if we were to do what MASC does and separate them out? And I'm leaning towards separating them out. But so that's my thought on that. One of the other things that came up, and actually the third and fourth page are pretty much all procedural. 90% of that, I think, is all procedural. And then my investigations also took me to a policy on, and again, this kind of goes beyond the scope of this particular agenda, but is related, that according to MASC, they have an IJDD policy on Facebook and social networking websites. And I don't believe we actually have a policy like that. And I think that might be something for a future agenda. I'm not sure that's something that we would take up, but maybe the education subcommittee would be looking at that. It's IJDD.
I think that we do have some kind of social media policy of some kind. I'm not familiar with it very well, but I believe I've seen it listed. So I don't know if there is some overlap there that we could take advantage of.
I think it's under people services.
Okay.
I had it up and then I closed the page to look for something else and the website's down. So now I can't see any of it, but we do have something general.
Just one more other comment is that my investigation also took me to another policy from MASC, which is the JBD. JBD, right? I think it's called Gender ID Support, Gender Identity. I think I saw it there. It's called JBD.
All right, it's JBB. Next one.
Malia, I think that was your area, right?
It is, and I did not see that policy, so I'm very perplexed because I did not come across that one. But I will double check.
So let me just say, okay, so maybe I'm finding it on a different school. So I did some investigations on in the school that I work in, the district that I work in, and they have a JBD, which I thought I had found in MASC.
What was the keyword? The title?
Gender identity support. Gender identity support.
All right, see if I
So
can find it.
maybe it's a district specific.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a different.
I did not come across that in my research, but I did not get to looking at, many other districts. Yeah. So it's possible. And again, that sort of goes, it kind of brings us into another branch of where we're going, but something that we may want to consider. If it's not an MASC policy, I have it from another district, and I don't know what the policy is for us. Do you know what district it is? Yeah, is it yours?
Hopkinton, yeah.
Okay.
So, so those are the notes that I came up with. Of course, I've got chicken scratches all over this this document here, our document that we're looking at tonight. And so I will work diligently to try to present something that's a little bit easier to read and understand and digest moving forward. That's all.
Sounds good. I guess it's either Member Longbelial and Member Gustafson if they want to update us on what they have found. No pressure if you need more time.
I think Linda's talking, but I can't hear her. She's muted.
Sorry. What I was going to say was that on that note, teacher, I'm going to apologize and say that I didn't do my homework. I'm sorry. I'll do my homework for next time, I promise.
No problem. No problem.
This meeting kind of snuck up on me.
Okay.
I apologize.
Yeah, that experience is always universal, and it doesn't matter how long we've lived; it's still not a great feeling. But it's a very forgiving group. Yeah, so yeah.
So 2 presentations I just saw. Wow. You guys really put me to shame, but
Well, this is going to be a long term. Yeah.
I'll try to.
I don't think we're going to
myself next
finish
time.
this in one meeting, Linda.
No.
Yeah,
Don't
we
worry
won't.
about it. Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right.
And I
So
know Maria's going to do a great job too.
I
so-
don't really have a presentation, but I have a lot of, I have information which we can figure out what to do with. I do have a document. I have it in a different window, so I don't know if it'll screen share, but I'll put the link in the chat because I made it a shareable link if you all want to see it, and then I'll explain. I was looking at discrimination on the basis of sex and gender identity support. I'll start with the easy part. With gender identity support, there is no policy, even in the MASC policy specifically on gender identity support. This is the formatting. This got screwed up just before the meeting, so don't. But I'll explain as I go my thought process, and hope this is useful in some way. So there is no policy on gender identity support in MASC. When I asked, that's why I asked Tracy about it, because I said, am I missing something? Because I know it's included in a lot of the anti-discrimination statements. And she said, no. She said, that's when she brought up the policy versus procedure. She said to have a specific policy for it may get into procedure. And I wasn't clear on what she meant by that, which is why I was going to have a follow-up conversation. So I did not go digging around school districts to see if any of them had it, because MASC did not have one. But I certainly will continue that discussion. So what I did find, though, when I started researching that piece, is I started going through our policies to see which policies have things related to that in it. And that's what you see at the beginning of the document. This document talks about a couple different things, but at the beginning is where I started that process. We have a lot of policies where we would need to update the language, where we have, him and her, but nothing else. So you have to choose him or her. And I don't think that's consistent with supporting gender identity. We have various language in various policies. So this is what I have found thus far and when we have updated it. There are, and I copied the language that was relevant onto this. So as we go, we can try and figure out, I don't know if we have to approve whole policies to change that language. I know there are some instances where MASC in their policy guidance has said, we reviewed our policies and we updated it to the current language, but we didn't have to, I don't know if you have to do a formal review if it's just updating to legal language, such as anti-discrimination. However, in things like this, where like the sexual harassment policy talks about man and boy and woman and girl and opposite sex, it doesn't talk about a continuum. That may be a more nuanced change that we have to make in a different way. So as I found these things, I made a note of them for reference so that we can at some point look at those so that all of our policies are consistent and supportive of the spectrum of gender identity. I did not get to every policy. I started with the student policies. And then as I got deeper into this discussion and investigating with sexual identity, sex, anyways, when I got into the other half of this, I found there's a lot of MASC policies that refer to the employment side as well. And I was in the process of going back to cross-reference all of our policies in terms of hiring and things like that to add to this when my formatting went awry and then the website crashed. So I will have to go back and do that. So this is mostly student policies that I have found thus far. And it's a starting point, but I was just trying to make note of things as I found it so we could be consistent in our language once we agree, or at least revisit these as necessary, because I think anything that has a him or her or a two gender distinction is not supportive of the current status of gender identity and how it's protected and how we'd like to be supporting our students. Another thing I will note is that related to that, I know just today in the confirmation hearing for the Secretary of Education, this came up a lot, actually, particularly in regards to athletics and policies around students using bathrooms and athletics. So I don't know. I know the previous administration did some things that were harmful in that regard. And I think the current administration has undone some of them and is probably going to be continuing that work. So I suspect there will be more updating to do. I did not see anything in our athletic policies that reflect gender at all. So that may be a can of worms we don't want to jump into immediately, but we need to have it on our radar. So I guess that's my general point around gender identity, is there's a lot of instances in our policies that we need to update so that our language is consistent. And they're not large changes in language, but their meaning is certainly so that's where I started this list. Then as I looked into the sexuality policies, anti-discrimination policy, MASC has a specific policy, ACA, and I have that. As I went digging, that's what the next section of this mostly is. I went through the MASC policy updates. They had several updates where they made reference to changes in state language, and one of them included gender identity, and one of them included pregnancy specifically. I think that was just last year. And they put out guidance that certain policies needed to be updated to reflect that. So I copied that information in here as well so that we can cross-reference which of our policies, again, are related to these, which, again, I was in the middle of. We don't have policies for every single thing that they have indicated, but we do have policies that cover most of these areas. We just call some of them different things. So what the second half of MASC references is basically anything that made a reference to the categories of harassment or discrimination that needed to be covered to be consistent with the law. And so as I came across those, I made note of those. So then I can go back and we can cross-reference again with our own policies that cover these areas. So that's what the second half is. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but it made sense in my head. And I thought it was useful as we try and wade through all this. I have a couple more things, but I don't know if there's questions yet on that. Can't hear anybody.
I have a question.
Sure.
And I'm not sure that you can answer this, but I think you're one of the senior people on the committee here.
Oh, that makes me feel old. Yeah.
But so tell me, why are our policies different than the MASC policy? And I understand that we're moving in the direction of trying to. Is that true?
I don't know if Linda Longvilla has more information, but I can tell you I have asked about that a couple times as I've gone to MASC conferences and heard this discussed.
I was just about to say it's one of those $1 million questions.
Yes, and ASM has been on the policy committee longer as well, but I know it's been discussed. The last time I asked about it was maybe 1.5 years ago, and I don't remember who. If it was Ken or Megan or, I don't remember who I asked, but I was basically told that it's complicated to change them because we have so many cross references, which it's not up to me, but that's the answer that I got the last time I asked because I was really curious. And I think what I've noticed is that our policies, as we revise them, have our number and then they have an MASC corresponding number underneath. I don't know historically why we have a different numbering system and why we couldn't just change them. Because, for example, MASC comes in and does policy reviews for districts and helps districts rewrite all their policies as a whole. As a service, it takes a few months or several months, even a year, but they will do that. And if they're able to do that for a district, I don't understand why we can't just update ours wholesale, but it's not up to me. I have asked.
Yeah, I think, I haven't been in the district that long, but I think I have some of this history.
That would be great.
And it could be totally wrong. If I'm wrong, then somebody jump in. But so Ed Sub, which I'm also on, we've been using MASC, at least since I've been here, to be a starting point for these policies. But there's some undoing, like we're doing here, of older policies that I believe were adopted from some out-of-state reference. I don't remember where, if anybody remembers that, but
I think it was Cleveland.
Thank you. Cleveland rocks.
Wow.
They also have policies that are all over ours. So yeah, there's and I'm not sure who exactly, there was prior administration that had affinity for those policies, we'll say. So but that is definitely a goal of at least Bob Burlow and I on Ed Sub, to have more alignment there and to be as aligned as possible because they're well written and well thought out through MASC.
I mean, that's a bigger discussion and maybe management will get to that eventually, but I didn't understand why it was so complicated. It sounds like that made it a little complicated too. To just say they cross-reference, so it's too complicated. Why can't we just reassign the numbers and say that's what we're doing? I don't know. That's beyond me. Legally, there must be a reason or someone who thinks there's a reason. So anyways, that's probably not helpful.
Well, it is helpful. And I guess I'm just wondering if, management, if we could ask management to take a stance on this, to clarify what is our ultimate goal here. It might be helpful. And I think that the argument for adopting these is, administration in all school districts change inevitably, and staffing changes and so on and so forth. And so if we can provide some continuity for leadership by having familiar language, familiar policies, then I think it makes the implementation of those policies a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, it's way easier to keep track of for sure. So, yeah, that's an interesting conversation. So I wish Megan were here. Maybe she could offer some opinions. But it's a definitely question. I have another couple things that came up. Let me think. As I said, the sexuality, the MASC has one policy, the ACA, which we do not have a policy that mirrors that. So I think that would be certainly something we need to do. It's really just a paragraph, and I have it on I'm sure Brian can pull it up, but I had it on my screen. It's really one paragraph that says, it has language that says in accordance with Title IX, you won't discriminate on the basis of sex in the educational programs, and it has like 2 other sentences, but I think it's all legal language. So it's very short and to the point, and I think we do not have that. So I think we certainly should create that to be in line with that. It seems very straightforward, basically saying, we'll agree with Title IX essentially, and it has reference to the Mass General Law and cross-reference to the non-discrimination policy as a whole. So I think that would be one easy step we could take, is to make our own version of that. I don't know what we'd call it, since we don't know which numbering system we're using. That would be a good question. I mean, I would just call it ACA and say we're moving in that direction, but I don't know. It's hard to know. That's why that numbering piece is probably important.
Would it be appropriate to add in like the gender identity piece into, if we're making a new policy? Do you think that, like, from what you've come across, do you think that that's reasonable, or is that really muddying?
So maybe this is why I wanted to talk to Tracy, because when I asked her that, I was very surprised by her answer, and I wasn't aware of the policy Laura mentioned. So I certainly will go read that after the meeting. Because when I asked her, I said I was surprised there wasn't one. She said that it was basically covered under the non-discrimination law that was updated, I think, in 2012 to include gender identity as a whole. So it's built into that general non-discrimination classes. And the support piece is not. But her statement was that to have a separate policy would then go into implementation. However, it's a question. So, I mean, we can implement support of it by making sure all of our other policies are in agreement and acceptance of the wide spectrum of gender identity, which is kind of what I started pointing out in the top of my chart. Or we could certainly probably create a separate policy, or we could put it into this, I suppose. My sense of this ACA is that it was specifically for non-discrimination according to the law. And so it looked like one of those that is taken directly from the language of the law regarding Title IX. So that was my that was my sense, that it was one of those that they just took, certain language from the law so that we were protected and had that on the books. So I don't know if it would be appropriate to put in with this, but I don't know. I wanted to dig further into her statement that to have a specific policy would be more procedure than policy. I wanted to kind of clarify what she meant by that, and I didn't have a chance to have that conversation. I don't know if having a general policy or statement, whether it's with this or with something else, that says it basically affirms that we support, the spectrum of gender identity, or however we want to phrase it, since there isn't really language out there. I don't know if that's worth doing, or if it's something that is conveyed through things in our other policies, like these, 10 other places that we make reference to him and her and different genders. And if every policy that we make and decision is aware of that and reflects that, that, I don't know if that's the better way to go about it, or if we should have a specific statement saying that we, affirm, or whatever we want to phrase it as, however we want to phrase it. I don't know. I did not get to dig in deeply to what other schools have done, because MASC didn't have anything specifically on that, so I didn't get further. So it's an interesting question.
And I think after I asked it, I realized I think that there has been federal rulings too, since where non-discrimination, like Title IX, basically applies to a lot more than what initially it applied to. So
it was included in 2012 in the non-discrimination law. That was referenced in one of the MASC policies, which isn't my chart, for reference, and that's when they added it to all of their policies. We have not. We have, I think, one policy that mentions that, and all of the others, the language is very outdated, even in terms of the classes, protected classes, basically.
Right.
We have almost every other policy is outdated. And then there are the other part of the language where we have him and her and two genders reflected. And again, I didn't go through every policy. I went through the student policies. I did not get to go through the employment section and all of the other operation procedures. That's due to other things, but that was next on my list to do, just as a starting point, and to fill in those in here so we have that reference, so then we can start figuring out how to make sure they're consistent, if that's something we want to do, which I think we do. But I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think that would be logical, since it's a protected class, that we don't want to be having our policies be discriminatory. I think certainly having him and her is certainly not supportive of gender identities. Just my opinion. I could be wrong. Some will disagree, but that's what what I was thinking. There's the language piece and there's the general affirmation piece. And there isn't a policy that exists. And then, as I said, the whole, the current issue of athletics is all over the place right now. And because there was an executive order last week about it. And so that got some people rather upset, and a lot of people talking about how that factors into athletics. And we don't have anything about that I could find in our policies about protecting student athletes. So that may be a specific direction we need to clarify, because it is a current issue, and it is certainly controversial, but it's something we'll probably have to address if we're being consistent.
Can I ask you a question, Brendan? Put you in the hot seat. Has something on that issue happened? Have we come across it in our district? Has everything been kind of under the radar?
Related to
coming up, the transgender in sports issue that's been in the national spotlight now.
Not that I'm aware of, but again, I've been here about 1.5 years, but not that I'm aware of.
I don't think it's come up. I've seen it in local conversations recently connected to the national conversation, but not specific to any athletes in our district. But honestly, I think it's only a matter of time before it does. particularly because people are becoming more aware of these issues and you know, that it's a protected class and we have to figure out how our policies address that. So I basically didn't find a lot in our policies, but I found a lot of things that we need to change to be consistent in being supportive of gender identity and non-discrimination on the basis of sex. So I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but that's what I found.
It is. It definitely is.
So, also, did I mention, Linda mentioned pregnancy earlier. That was updated in last year in the MASC policies as an addition to the protected classes and all of the anti-discrimination statements. And we have not updated most of our policies to reflect that. We have maybe one again that's been updated. Most of them have not, but that was specifically in their policy updates sent out last year that should be updated to reflect current state law also. Which is not specifically sex, but it was related. It was a lot of the similar discussions.
So I guess I have a question for the general discussion of how we want to look at these non-discrimination policies in concert with the harassment policy. Because I think that that's what all of our homework assignments come back to, right? Is we have these statements of non-discrimination. When they are violated, that's when the harassment policy is like activated, I guess you could say. Is that a fair understanding of how our policies work together? And if so, how do we do this systematically so that we're not constantly backfilling and, oh, we got this updated, but now this is reaching out into this other area, we have to update this too. So I guess what I'm asking is, what's the next step?
I think I have a question now. I'm sorry I missed last week. I didn't get any homework. So I get out of it, I guess. But what I'm wondering is, Malia put up a good point about how we're cross-referencing all these policies to MASC policies, and we're adopting some of their language, and it just makes no sense to me to just, we're picking and have to like go through these, and there's a policy already written, and I don't know, I think it is worth bringing to the business and finance, is it business that we said that might be able to answer the question as to why we just can't adopt these policies and
Management,
sorry,
management. I don't know when they're meeting again. They've met like 3 times since June, so I don't know when they're meeting again, but we could ask.
I just think it's worth the while because we're bringing up all these questions on how to word the policies, and then do we keep the procedure in with them, or do we make, I mean, if MASC already has the procedure separate from the policies, then can't we just use them? I don't know. It seems so much back work to do that instead of just being able to adopt the policies as is. I don't know. And then add to it, of course, like what we need to.
A lot of them we have similar titles, not in this area, but in the big picture, we have similar titles. We just have completely different numbering, and a lot of them go into more detail than the MASC policies. But we have similar, like the titles are similar. It's weird. And I don't know, like I said, if you create a new one, I don't know how you discern what number it gets in our system, or where you make that break and you just.
We had to do that for the face coverings policy, and Rebecca actually had given a suggestion of where to stick it in with, I forget where, it's in the 6000 series, but it was in between something and eye protection. So, I mean, I think that, and so that's why it's like 6000 something something .1. So, I mean, I agree that it would be ample opportunity to just say, all right, from here on out, we're going to, when we add in a new policy, we're going to change. But I think you're right that that's gonna come from management, doesn't it? So
Mhm.
I don't know.
Okay.
So I had a question about the procedure piece, though. As I said, I am hoping to have a conversation with Tracy at some point to follow up on my email, but I don't know if that's something that if the committee feels it would be useful to hear that rather than secondhand. I don't know if it's something where we'd want to see if she could join us at a future meeting to cover that, or if you just want me to relay what what she can explain. It's just a question.
I think you can relay it, Malia,
Okay.
because having her come on might take some time to coordinate. So if we want to move along, I
Okay.
think we can just convey it.
Okay. I'll see what I can get. See if I can get anything in writing too.
Now, one thing I was wondering about if it would be useful, and I wish I had a whiteboard right now and that we were in person, because we'd be mapping this out on a whiteboard, I think. But I think I came up with a workaround. I was wondering if it makes sense, because there's so many different ideas and policies, if we kind of arrange them in a way that we think might make sense, because I know we have what we have now, it's all clustered and bundled, but I could, and this is just an idea, I'm just going to share this window, stand by, because we can kind of get a little map going on here of how they should be clustered maybe. I mean, it could just follow MASC too. So I don't know if this will be maybe a good way to wind down the meeting and at least kind of know where we're going.
Yeah, I think that is a great way to visualize where they intersect. Is that what in like a
Yeah, and like where they're going to live, it's like if we're proposing restructuring the policies, which it sounds like, or breaking this policy out, it could just follow MASC, but maybe mapping that out and making sure we don't miss anything. And I just started that here. So if that's a useful exercise, I thought that might be something we could at least start.
I certainly like the way that you've started mapping this. And I would add to this that where does the anti-bullying plan? I keep saying bullying plan as if that's the plan. We have a plan for bullying. No, we have a plan for anti-bullying, right?
Yeah. It's not a how-to, not a how-to. Yeah.
So is that something like, I think Linda or somebody mentioned this, is like when harassment occurs or when discrimination is occurring, is that when, and or something has been labeled bullying, is that when we kick this plan into play? And so is that the bullying prevention plan, is that in the middle?
Yeah.
Does that reside in the middle, or is that a separate place? You know what I mean?
Or is it at the top, like kind of an overarching, like that's maybe the starting point we rule out?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Something similar, but this kind of idea. It's more the way, like we kind of think about, this gets at process and policy, I think, if we look at it this way visually.
I'd almost wonder if looking at it as almost like a dominoes, where we've got this or like a dam or something like that, where we've got the prevention plan, and just looking back at this subcommittee's original charges too, like one of the charges was to work on crafting a racism intervention and prevention plan. So there's that. I think that the protected classes that are in the non-discrimination policy and harassment policy, like I think that those kinds of prevention plans are like the dam, and if something comes through, that's when the procedures come into play. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I just kind of talked myself out of it too. So I don't know.
I don't think it's linear. I mean, this is great to visualize, but I feel like I need to, in my mind, I don't want to imply that the bullying prevention plan is like the umbrella over everything. I think it's a process reference, But I think we need to be somewhat cautious because some of these particular plans, at least if you look at the MA or policies, if you look at the MASC guide, are very specific and they're not process related. Some are, like the harassment and sexual harassment, but others are more stating protections and things, not process related specifically. So I think it's all related, but I don't want anyone to think, oh, well, it's all, we have a process for each of these, because some don't require process. Some are more of a statement or, you know, have a different purpose.
And I agree that's not linear for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking of kind of how things play out. Typically, bullying report would come in and it could and sometimes should trigger another investigation based on another
Thing, right?
statute. So that's typically how it would come in, because that's the language that is universal. Like parents understand that, kids understand bullying, but kids don't understand Title IX for you know, natural reasons. So I mean, so it's not, I agree that's not linear, and that we probably shouldn't use this to say here's the procedure. It's more for our thinking now.
It's thought process. It's like thought bubbles. It's good. I was just clarifying.
Yeah,
The other thing, and I don't know where I'd put this, maybe at the bottom would be a blurb for the language consistency that we need to fix in all of our policies. Just the basic non-discrimination statement that is out of date in a lot of our policies. And the language I brought up about the him and her and the gender identity issues as well. And I think that is, I don't know how we go about that if we just have a list and we, I mean, the just non-discrimination language right from state law, we may be able to do easily without reapproving every policy. I'm not sure. I have to look at our bylaws, but that may be an easier change because it's just making sure it reflects the law. Things like the his and her may be a technical reapproval, you know, process, because that's not from the law. It's just reflecting practice or, you know, the current law, but it's not directly from a law. But I think we need to work on that simultaneously because those are short changes, but meaningful. I don't know the best process for that, but.
Yeah. Laura, I think you were going to jump on, right? Sure if you had.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important comment that you made, Malia. I appreciate you emphasizing that. You know, I think that this is the kind of advocacy that folks at home need to hear from us, to know that they are considered as we are going about this process. In terms of these bubbles, these thought bubbles that are underneath the bullying prevention plan, I almost see them as pillars holding up rather than filtering down. I see them as pillars, right? That these are propping up our bullying prevention plan. The kids and are going to probably enter into this paradigm by coming in at it through the bullying, right? As Brendan said, this is their language. They're gonna say somebody's bullying me and so on and so forth. But these pillars that prop up this bullying prevention plan are going to be the pieces that we have to ensure through our process, right? Through that plan, we have to ensure that none of these, legal policies have been infringed on.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's not a drop down menu. It's more of these things are holding up our bullying prevention plan. They're pillars.
Something like that. I don't know. Just for fun here. I'm just getting carried away at this late hour. But yeah, something like that. Yeah, and it's more like I also been thinking about what's not reflected here that we discussed too. I was thinking of the list, Linda, that you're keeping on kind of that wish list. You know, what in these policies is not listed here? And I'm just, I'll do this for now based on Laura's feedback.
What you're talking about, like creed and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so religion, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we say creed, right? No. So I mean, I'm thinking this could be like our checklist once we are actually restructuring these policies to say, are we addressing everything if we make this inclusive?
See, I thought religion was included in some of the non-discrimination language, but
Mhm.
actually it's not in all of it. It's interesting.
Mm.
It's very interesting. My only, I mean, I didn't write the laws, but my only guess would be that that the federal laws that say, not limited to, harassment based on all these classes are, identifying things, whereas religion is like a practice. So it's perhaps handled differently. Oh, there is one in 2019 that mentions religion. So I don't know. It's inconsistent.
So I think that, to circle back to the ensure language consistency, I know I'm jumping off the
Actually, 2018 and 2019 mention religion. So I take that statement back. That seems to be the most recent update, which we don't have.
I think that having a statement about, the gender non-conforming would allow us to have a common phrasing that would then inform our other policies. So, I think that even though MASC doesn't necessarily have one that we could use, this JBD from Hopkinton, I don't know where it came from, if it came from another school or whatever, but I would suggest that maybe we take a look at that, so that we can maybe get some sort of language that we can all say, yes, this is the language that is we're going to support and advocate for, and then that will inform our revision of any other policies that might have those gender binary terms in there.
Would I didn't do this yet because I was going to talk to Tracy first, but would anyone object if I put that out to the listserv, to the MASC listserv, to see if anyone else has policies around that?
That sounds like a great idea.
As a fact finding, I mean, I don't know if they exist, but
Yeah, that's a great idea.
okay, I will do that at some point in the next day or so.
So with looking at, I know that that's like a clear item for checking for language consistency. Are there other ones that have updated language that, I mean, I'm just thinking about when we looked at like the appreciation of diversity policy and we looked at it and think, well, yeah, it's fine, but it feels very 90s. I mean, do we have other types of language use that fit into like one of the protected classes or something like that we should keep being mindful of? I mean, I'm kind of drawing a blank at the moment, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's why we do the 90-minute meetings, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
The related policies, you're getting at, Linda, right? And we.
Well, not just the policies, but like looking through, because what I'm getting from what Malia is talking about is like going through the sexual harassment policy and noting how we're using pronouns, right? And how we're that kind of language examination. And so I don't know if there's another group, another issue, another identity that is separate from gender identity that is going through that same kind of language evolution. Does that make that's what I'm just thinking, is there, if we're giving that examination for gender identity, is there another area just to try to root out blind spots?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure there are. I mean, there's some very old policies that we have, right? So
the question then becomes like, the more you list, the more you identify, the more risk you have of excluding in the list, right? So trying to come up with words, and I'm sure that this has already been done. We just need to find these words from our resources, but trying to find words that are inclusive rather than exclusive would allow us to protect, a list of protected classes, whatever the terminology might be, that would then allow us to make this a living document, right? To Like in our 6631, for example,
Yeah.
has no person and someone, right? So it's very non-specific in terms of gender or identity and anything. So
That's the one I was trying to put in when my table got all screwed up. So it's funny. A lot of our policies, I actually, as I said, I looked through at least 2 subsections and I opened every policy looking, and there weren't as many examples as I thought, because most of them use terminology like the student or the employee or something very broad, which is a good thing. And I think if we could stick to that, we'd be in a good place. But then there are these other places where pronouns and other things crept in. But many of our policies, thankfully, actually do say the student or something more broad, which is a good thing. I was surprised, but.
So I'm thinking maybe we start out the next meeting with just making sure we get all our kind of big buckets laid out that we're covering everything. And then I think it's mapping out where we go, how we want the policies to actually look and restructure.
I agree.
So for the next step, would it make sense to put the non-discrimination policies for our agenda to be the first step in updating instead of updating the harassment policy first? Would that make sense for the next action?
I think so, Linda. That sounds good to everyone else. It sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Could-
So
do we all want to also add to that agenda to look at this current policy, the 6437 that we're looking at, and really try and tackle omitting those procedural pieces? Could we do that as well? And that might help us make that policy a little bit more digestible as well. Like once we start taking out the policy, the procedure.
Yeah.
I also am going to continue looking up the policies regarding gender identity, because I think making sure that non-discrimination at least is consistent. The statement that's in probably a dozen of our policies, and it's straight from the law, but it's just not been updated since 2012 or 2018. And our policies are very old, a lot of them. So I'm going to continue looking that up, because I think that may be a fairly easy fix in some cases, or update, just to make sure that the language from the law where it is reflected is correct. I won't say it's easy, but I mean, that should be easier than rewriting entire policies. It doesn't have to be on the agenda. I'm just going to keep doing it because I think it's important and we need to be consistent.
Yeah.
And quick question: if we're taking the procedure out of the policy written, where is that going to go? What's the plan for that? Will there be a different area for the procedure?
So that's more around investigation. We're talking with procedure, right? And that's where I go back to what our legal counsel said. Bullying prevention plan has a procedure that for investigating that's transferable, that's good for all of these, protecting victims, doing intermediary steps to make sure they're safe. All of those things apply to everyone. So it would be referencing it back to that BPIP, which is every 2 years, like somebody said earlier. We review that.
Okay. All right.
So we have our next steps.
Yeah, you guys have your next to-dos for our next meeting, which brings us to checking out our dates in our calendar of when we are available. What was I remember we had said not Thursday moving forward. There was another day that we were going to do.
I think we were talking about doing Tuesdays in the future. Does that sound right to others?
I can't do Tuesdays. Sorry. I won't have childcare. My husband has class. He can't get out of it.
Is there Mondays? Did we decide Mondays didn't work or?
I couldn't do Mondays and Wednesdays. I have a class.
Okay. So now we can't do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
I wonder,
I
I
mean,
mean,
no,
I
we
hate to say this, but I know that, oh my gosh,
Sunday brunch.
Krista isn't here because she can't do Thursday.
Would
if
we-
I'm forgetting. So, I mean, I don't know if it makes sense to, if we can't get a day that everyone can be there, if we maybe rotate the days.
That's what
so
I was
that-
gonna say. Since we
so
did
that-
Thursday this time, maybe do Tuesday next week and then do the Thursday the next time we meet after that.
I mean, I'm not opposed to weekends either, though. That's a
I
funny
could do
joke. But I
Fridays.
am not, but
Oh, my
Or-
family would kill me if I,
I
did
know,
Friday.
I was half joking, but I'm just trying to think outside the box. Like, I can't figure it out.
You
But
gotta need,
maybe just rotating would work.
yeah, that's a good.
Let's rotate then. So if we did Thursday now, let's look at, does the 16th of February too early for everyone?
That's
I have a meeting that night.
vacation. That's school vacation week. I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe-
yes,
Yeah.
that is
Oh.
true. How about
I
the
also cannot-
23rd?
I also cannot meet the third Tuesday, but other than that, we're good.
Is the
So the
23rd
20
work for you?
23rd of February?
Yes.
Yep, that works for
Sure.
me.
Let me look.
Yeah, that's good for me.
Yeah, that'll work.
If my husband's class gets out early, I can always jump on a little late if it's on a Tuesday. It's fine.
We'll just sign you up for all the next homework assignments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sounds good. In that case, I believe I can take a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Sounds good.
Uh,
Member Christenbaum,
Yes.
Member Ayala,
Ayala, yes.
Member Woodland,
Woodland, yes.
Member Gustafson,
Yes.
Member Long-Bleal,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. That was a very productive meeting. Thank you,
Yes, it was.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.